Hello YouTube. What we're going to do in this video is I'm going to show off the digital downloaded titles that I have on the PlayStation 3. I couldn't really think of any other way to cover this other than just basically recording off the screen of the TV. So we'll give that a try and we'll see how the video comes out. So basically I'm just have it on the TV. I'm controlling it with the Sony Blu-ray remote. So let's see what we have. Um, we'll start out and just go to the bottom of the list and we'll just go through it. So, for those who don't know, on the PlayStation 3 there is also some retro titles and things that you can also purchase as digital downloads. So, they're categorized by the system of origin. So at the bottom of the list here we have Neo Geo. There was a collection, I think there's two collections of games that they have. I better turn the sound down a little bit. Okay. There was two collections that were part of this Neo Geo Station collection. I think there was first 8, and then I think there was maybe 4 or 6 more that came out subsequent. The only two that I bought was Samurai Showdown 1 and the King of Fighters 94. These are both fighting games, 2D. They're basically just straight up Neo Geo ports to the PlayStation hardware, and it supports the memory saving to the hard drive. The next system we have here is the PC Engine, which in America was known as the TurboGrafx 16. It was by NEC. It came out at the same time as, I think it competed with the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. It was never really that big in the States. I know that. I only ever knew one person who ever had one. The neat thing about the PC Engine of the TurboGrafx 16 is that the games came in a very unique form factor called the HU card, or the HU card for Hudson, as the designer of it. It was basically like a plastic credit card that you slid into the system. It was just the only memorable thing I really remember about that. The one title I did pick up for this is a game called Alien Crush, which is a pinball game. So it's, just a 2D pinball game, TurboGrafx 16. The next section we have is PlayStation 1 digital downloaded titles. We'll go down to the bottom here. We'll just go through these. We have Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which is, I do own physical copies of this game, but it's nice to be able to just play them off the hard drive. And this is also, you can copy the game through the PlayStation 3 to a PSP, and you can basically copy the disc ISO to the PlayStation Portable, and you can play the game that way. So we have Castlevania Symphony of the Night. We have R-Types, which is by Taito. I think this is the third game in the R-Type series. I don't know if this also includes the original ones, or this might be just I think this is just a collection of R-Type 1 and 2. I believe that's what this is. The one that I was thinking of, I think, is called R-Type Delta, which was a later game in the series. We have a digital download of King of Fighters 99. I've said quite a bit about the King of Fighters series in the other videos. They're fun, they're 2D, they're, SNK, Neo Geo stuff that, they basically were making 2D games for the longest time. These games have their followers. They have kind of some unique fighting game system. The way that the mechanics of the games work is neat. We have Street Fighter Alpha 2. This is another game that I have as a physical version, but this way you can just have it on the hard drive. You can load it anytime you want. The Alpha series was fun. I think it was kind of started out as like a side story, but I think they were just playing around with some of the game mechanics. This was after Street Fighter 2, and during that 10-year segment before Street Fighter 3 came out. They were doing the Alpha series, and then they were licensing the Street Fighter name to, I think it was Arika was the company that was making Street Fighter EX and EX Plus Alpha and all those 3D games that were horrible. So this was kind of a 2D series that they were putting out that they're well regarded. I don't have the first one or the third one. I think I have them in collected form on the PlayStation 2, but this is the only one that I have on here. We have Final Fantasy VII. I don't think there's really too much to say about Final Fantasy VII. I mean, it's well regarded as popularizing the RPG series, basically that genre in the States. I have to say that I'm a fan of the earlier games in the series. I like the Super Nintendo ones a little bit better, but this game does have its fans, and I can understand why. We have Mobile Light Force, which this is bizarre. I don't know if you can see on the thing, but the packaging for this looks like this weird Charlie's Angels kind of game. It's got these three girls with guns running towards the image, but that's not what this is at all. This is a shoot 'em up. This game, I can't remember what it was originally called. Yeah, I'll have to post a comment on the video if I look it up. I think it's Castle Shikigami, because I know that the Castle Shikigami 2 is a top-down scrolling shoot 'em up that is on the PlayStation 2. I believe this is the first one in that series, and for whatever reason it came out and it was called Mobile Light Force. So if I'm wrong, I'll go ahead and I'll comment and type what it was. We have Blood Omen Legacy of Kain. This is a mid to late 90s early PlayStation game that's kind of a top-down RPG. It's kind of like a Legend of Zelda kind of game. You play this vampire, you run around, you're trying to figure out what's going on in the world. It was pretty neat. We have the original Silent Hill. I don't own this physically because this title is pretty rare in physical form. If you want to try to track down a copy on eBay, I know it's pretty uncommon. So I bought the digital download when it came out on the PlayStation 3, so I had a way of playing the game. I really like the first two ones in the Silent Hill game. That was by the core team at Konami. They're really good. They're pretty scary, pretty interesting kind of horror game. It's a little bit different than the Resident Evil type games where Resident Evil you just go around and you shoot at zombies. Silent Hill is more esoteric. It's more of the sheer horror of it. There's a lot of times you just basically run. You don't want to force combat unless you need to. It's neat, and it has a kind of a crazy story that'll blow you away. We have Final Fantasy Tactics, which is a fun game. This is a turn-based strategy game that's top-down. I did at one point own a physical copy of this, but I do not have it any longer. But I figured it's a digital download, so it doesn't really matter. I do have the re-release of this game on PSP, which was called Final Fantasy Tactics War of the Lions, which is basically the same game with some added content. We have Resident Evil 2. I don't think this is labeled here, but I believe that this is the DualShock edition, which had extra content. We also have Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, which is not a huge fan of this game, but I picked it up anyway so I can play it. We have Nitrous Oxide, which is a Tempest-style shoot 'em up where you control your ship and you swirl around on the outside of the screen and you shoot at little bugs and things like that. But it's fun, and it has a neat soundtrack by the group The Crystal Method. We have Castlevania Chronicles, which is this is a 2D Castlevania game that I believe is a re-release of PC Engine game or a MSX computer game or something, but I know Noah's two games that, like it says here, returns with a classic version that was never before seen in America. This is classic hard Castlevania, like the original NES titles. I also have some weird Japanese releases. Something they did, I think, in like 2010 or 11 was they released a bunch of Japanese PlayStation 1 titles that basically are untranslated. They're just basically collections of kind of some obscure titles that never were out in the States. So we have, I don't remember what this one is called. This is like this shoot 'em up with these like bodybuilders. It's very bizarre. This is a game called Gaia Seed, I believe, which is just, it's a shoot 'em up, like a space shooter kind of game. And then I have the Japanese releases of the first 4 Mega Man games, which I think in Japan is called Rockman. So for whatever reason, these were never issued in the States. It's like the NES game on a CD-ROM, and that's what they were selling in Japan. So these are the Japanese PlayStation releases through the US PlayStation Store. So we have Mega Man 1, Mega Man 2, Mega Man 3, and then Mega Man 4, I believe. I don't think they made any of the other ones. I don't think 5 or 6 came out in this method on the PlayStation Store in the States. For PlayStation 2, the only title I have is Capcom vs. SNK 2, because this title is pretty rare and pretty expensive if you choose to buy it in the physical form. We also have the Minis selection, which is just basically little mini apps. We have Angry Birds and the PacMan Championship Edition. These are cross-play titles between PlayStation 3 and PlayStation Portable. The bulk of what we have here, this is the PlayStation 3 section, so we'll scroll down to the bottom here. These are just in the order that they were purchased on the system itself. So we have a download version of Mortal Kombat 2, which is basically just the arcade ROM released on the PlayStation Store. This is, I think, a PlayStation 3 launch title. I think the date, this is like 2007, which would have been right when I bought the PlayStation 3 originally. We have Tekken 5 Dark Resurrection Online, which is the this was released on PlayStation 2, just the regular Tekken 5. When the PlayStation 3 came out, they had basically the updated Japanese arcade version of the game, which was Tekken 5 Dark Resurrection, and they released that as a download title on the PlayStation 3. Next, we have Gran Turismo HD Concept, which was a free game that was a free download in the early days of the PlayStation 3. I still have this on the system. I don't think that they sell this anymore. You can't get this from the store anymore, so I think if I ever delete this off the hard drive, there might not be a way of ever getting it back. Next, we have Super Stardust HD, which is a top-down shooter where you spin around kind of like a 3D globe world, and you have different weapons and things you can choose from. This game is really neat. I remember that every time I would go back and play it, like a year later, there would be a new update, new patch with new content. So it's kind of neat that the developer, which is a company called Housemarque, that they have a similar shooter game that they released on the PlayStation 4 as a launch title that I think is called Resogun. So they, that's a good developer if they keep going and they keep updating their game, years after it was published, which is pretty neat. We have PixelJunk Monsters, which is a tower defense game. So, you can just look that up on the internet if you don't know what tower defense is. And then this has the soundtrack associated with it as well. We have the Metal Gear Solid 4 database, which was a free download when Metal Gear Solid 4 came out. This is basically like an online encyclopedia of every term and element and character from all of the Metal Gear games. So instead of going and finding something on Wikipedia on the internet, you could use this and you can do searches, and it records what you've read and what you haven't, and you kind of unlock new content that way. We have Bionic Commando Rearmed, which is a kind of a re-release of the original NES Bionic Commando, but it also has some additional gameplay changes, and it's with modern 3D graphics. This was kind of neat. It's Bionic Commando. I really like that game, so I figured I would pick this up. I have Roco Coco Recchio, which I think I'm pronouncing that right. This is Loco Roco was a puzzle game that came out on the PlayStation Portable. This was I believe the only version of it that came out on PlayStation 3, which is just kind of I think this is like a cheap title that was maybe like $1.99 or $4.99 or something like that. We have Wipeout HD, which has also the expansion pack, which is HD Fury. This is one of the last games in the Wipeout series. It was done by Studio Liverpool, which was kind of the remnants of Psygnosis, which was the developer that made all the original Wipeout games. This game is phenomenal. I mean, it runs 60 frames a second, 1080p. There's very, very little titles on the PlayStation 3 that can even pull off 1080p. Most games are 720p, and just to squeeze what they can out of the hardware. But this was a very, very well done game that is basically, it's a good show off of what the system is capable of, even though I think the game came out in 2008. Next, we have Mega Man 9, which was a classic remake. I mean, it looks like a brand new NES game. So it has the classic Mega Man graphics, with the NES-style sprites. This one was very difficult, I remember. I don't know if it's just me not being able to, to keep up, but I remember that being a very challenging game, which is nice. Linger in Shadows, this is kind of a strange, this is more of like an art title, like an exploration art title. There's not really a game associated with it. It's basically like a tech demo that you can manipulate, and you can use the DualShock controller to move around on screen. I don't know if this is still for sale in the store, but it's a neat pickup if anyone is interested in kind of some neat things you could do with the system hardware. You know, and this was basically, I think there was a handful of teams that Sony gave development kits for, and they went and did what they could with the hardware to kind of make like a unique little 3D interactive art title. Next we have, this is Street Fighter 2, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix, which is the final, or most recent update to the Street Fighter 2 series. This, I think, came out in the late 2000s. It had redrawn new sprites that I think were done by Udon Studios, which is a comic book company. So this had very, very high-end, 2D graphics. And it's basically just classic Street Fighter 2, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo gameplay. And I think there's different modes you could do. You could toggle which versions of characters you wanted to play, things like that. We have Everyday Shooter, which is, I think it's a twin-stick shooter game in the style of like a Robotron 2084 or Smash TV. This is, as far as I know, is programmed by one single person, because when you play the game, it basically says, this game by me, I think the guy's name is Jonathan Mack or something like that. This is pretty neat, and it's kind of like a art and graphics at the same time, mixed with some unique sounds. And I remember every level of the game had like a different gameplay mechanic. It's just kind of a neat little title. We have Zoltanrx Himmelstormer, which is a shoot-'em-up. It's a side-scrolling space shooter that was, I think this is pretty neat. I haven't played this in quite a while, but I remember it being pretty difficult. There's a sequel that we'll get to in a couple minutes here that was a lot more easy to play, but I remember this first one being very, very difficult, but the graphics are pretty good as well. We have Nobi Nobi Boy, which is a really far out there, quirky Japanese puzzle game. This is from the creator of the Katamari Damacy games. He basically made this game, and you have this bizarre character that you can stretch out. You use both sticks on the analog controller, and you can just you walk around on these like little 3D areas that have very simple graphics, and you kind of pick things up, and you can stretch around buildings, and you can eat things, and it's very, very bizarre, very quirky. Next we have GunStar Heroes, which is a PlayStation 3 digital release of the Sega Genesis game, GunStar Heroes. And I think that was an early side-scrolling shooter that was by Treasure, which is a company that went on to make a number of notable shooters. So I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure this was by Treasure. I think this is one of the first games that they're known for. Next up, we have a PlayStation 3 release of Wolfenstein 3D. This is basically the original early 90s PC game that was just released on the PlayStation 3. There's the graphics are the same as the original PC game, the sound, everything. So it's basically just a port of a 20-year-old game. Trash Panic. This is a bizarre Japanese puzzle game. I don't remember what the original name was in Japan, but it's kind of like a Tetris or a Dr. Mario kind of game where you have these objects that are falling into this, rectangular shaped bin, and then you can manipulate them in certain ways, and basically what you have to do is you have to compact the trash before you run out of time. It's pretty neat. We have Crystal Defenders, which is a Final Fantasy title. This is a Final Fantasy tower defense, basically. We have the PlayStation 3 release of Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which is one of the better far out there 2D Capcom games. This was the final game in the series of the 2D of the Marvel Comics crossovers. They had X-Men vs. Street Fighter was the first one. Then they had Marvel Superheroes, I believe, and Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter. Oh, the original was the X-Men Children of the Atom, I think it was called. It was just the X-Men fighting game, and then they started mixing in the Street Fighter characters, and then when the Marvel vs. Capcom and Marvel vs. Capcom 2 came out, it was basically like, 60 characters from all these different games and all these different comic book properties, which is kind of neat. Next up, we have Shatter, which is Breakout or Arkanoid style puzzle game where you manipulate a paddle at the bottom of the screen and you have to keep knocking the ball against the bricks to try to knock it out. This has a really, really cool soundtrack too. This is definitely worth a pickup. We have Numblast, which is a puzzle game that is kind of like a dice manipulation game where you have to swap the tiles on the game board in order to get matches to get them to disappear. This is pretty cool. We have Military Madness Nectarous, this is a re-release of the original Military Madness, which was a TurboGrafx 16 title, if I'm not mistaken. This is pretty cool. It's a turn-based strategy game. Very simple, very traditional, but it's still cool. We have Critter Crunch, which is a puzzle game, sort of like Dr. Mario or Tetris, where you have these creatures falling from the top of the screen. You have to line them up in certain ways in order to get them to collapse in on each other, and then that's how you get points. We have Afterburner Climax, which is they made a new Afterburner game after like 15 or 20 years. Afterburner was a old Sega arcade game which never really had a decent home port, on the Genesis era or anything like that. But this is a modern version of it that I think is like 60 frames a second. I don't know if this ever got an arcade release, but I would say probably not. If it did, it would have only get one in Japan. But this is fun. I think this was like a $10 title that was pretty neat. Here we have the Zolder X2 final prototype. This is the sequel to the original one. It's a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up game. We have PixelJunk Shooter, it's a neat shoot-'em-up game with, I think it has like a hover mechanic where the way that you control the ship and move it around, you have a little claw that you can use to pick things up. And I remember there being some neat game mechanics where there's like these lava tunnels and ice things and things like that you have to break. But this is pretty cool. We have Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the game, which is a side-scrolling beat-em-up, like a Final Fight style game. We have Mega Man 10, which is another 2D NES style Mega Man game. I remember this being easier than Mega Man 9, but still fun. We have PacMan Championship Edition DX Plus, which is a newer Pac-Man title with classic graphics, but kind of a pretty far out there action-packed gameplay, which is pretty neat. Same thing with this. We have the Space Invaders Infinity Gene, which is kind of a remake of the classic Space Invaders, and then as you play through the levels, the graphics evolve and get better and better, which is neat. We have Dead Space Extraction. There's two Dead Space games on here. I don't remember which one's which. One of them is a rail shooter that was a kind of like a light gun game. You can also use the controller for it. I think that's what this one is. This was a freebie that came with the Dead Space 2 Collector's Edition. And then the other one that came on there was Dead Space Ignition, which I believe was a puzzle game where you had to connect these computer circuits. And I think if you did you did things in these games, it would unlock items in Dead Space 2. We have Dead Nation, which is I think it's a zombie game. I remember when Sony had their issues with the PlayStation Network. I think that was in 2012, where basically the PlayStation Network was down for a couple of weeks when they had some problems on their server side. I think they had there was a high-profile computer hacking incident that happened, and the PlayStation Network was down for a while. When it came back on, they gave everybody like a handful of free games, so I had to go through the list and pick ones that I didn't already own. So I picked up this, Dead Nation. I don't think I ever played this. I think this is I think it's like a twin-stick shooter where it's a top-down. I believe that's what it is. Maybe I played it for like 5 or 10 minutes, but that was it. I also have the original Infamous, which I'll be honest, I did not play. I think I also got some free PlayStation Portable games out of that deal, too, when they were giving some free stuff out. We have the Mortal Kombat Arcade Collection, which is Mortal Kombat 1, 2, and 3, and then I think it has Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 as well. And these are just ports of the arcade version with achievements and online play, I believe. We have Resident Evil 4. This is the HD re-release that came out on the PlayStation 3. I think at the same time they also released Code Veronica, which was the Dreamcast exclusive Resident Evil game. I don't think I picked that one up. I think these were like $10 or $15, and I didn't buy both of them. I bought this one because I remember I liked this game more. We have Castlevania Harmony of Despair. This is a classic 2D Castlevania game that has kind of RPG elements, and it's basically like a score attack or a time attack kind of thing where you have to you do what you can on the board and you fight the boss. There's like item drops and things like that, and it has a big online component too. This was an Xbox 360 exclusive for excuse me, a couple of years, and then eventually in late 2011 it did receive a release on the PlayStation 3, which is good. You know, kind of see Castlevania come home too. You know, I mean, it's the PlayStation 1 Castlevania Symphony of the Night is probably one of the best known titles in that series, and this is kind of a mix of characters from that game and the Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS Castlevania games. So it's kind of like all these different 2D Castlevania characters in one game. Next we have Galaga Legion DX, which is it's a new game in the Galaga series, so it's a shooter. It's like an arcade style shooter. We have PixelJunk side scroller, which is exactly what it says. It's a side scroller shoot 'em up. PixelJunk, I think they're a Japanese developer that's got these. They come out with these different games in different genres. I have a bunch of their titles on here, if not all of them. The next one is PixelJunk Eden, which is this is kind of like a puzzle strategy game, sort of. And it's kind of like this exploration art kind of game as well. We have PixelJunk Shooter 2, which is more of the same. We have Marvel vs. Capcom Origins. This is, I think, Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter and Marvel vs. Capcom 1 as a digital download. And those both have achievements and online play. This was a late release. This is I think the date that I purchased this was in late 2012, so I think that's probably around when it came out. We have One Piece Pirate Warriors, which is basically part of the Dynasty Warriors series. It's another anime license that they had. This was came out in Japan. It probably would have been called One Piece Musou, which is the name for the Dynasty Warriors games over there. So it's basically Dynasty Warriors 7, Dynasty Warriors 8 gameplay with the One Piece anime. This never received a physical release in the US, and the digital release of this is in the Japanese language only with subtitles. There is a sequel to this. This just to say it's Pirate Warriors 2 that I do not own. I think it's still like $60 on the PlayStation Store, which is kind of ridiculous. We have Tekken Tag Tournament HD. This was a freebie that came with the Tekken Hybrid. You basically put the disc in the system and it installs this to the hard drive. We have Fist of the North Star Ken's Rage 2, which I recently picked up. I like the first one. I think the second one they kind of optimized the game engine a little bit more, so the graphics are a little more fluid, but I haven't played too much of this, more than I think a couple of levels in. Yeah, haven't been using the PlayStation 3 all that much recently, but I'll eventually get around to going through and beating this. And then the final game that I have on here is Tekken Revolution, which I only recently found out about, which is it's a Tekken free-to-play game that I think you can pay real money to play more online matches, but I didn't play more than 10 or 15 minutes of this. I think that's pretty much it. I don't know if we had I don't know if there's a separate PlayStation Portable section. I think I have a handful of PSP games that are basically on here that are you have to hook up the PlayStation Portable to the system in order to transfer these, so that's why they have a little bubble around them. I think that's pretty much it. See, I don't think the games are stored anywhere else here on the system, but thanks for watching. As always, leave a comment, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel if you like what you see. Thanks a lot.